Hi there, I'm Matt Donnelly of RotoBaller, and let's talk about those starts and sits at the wide receiver position heading into week number 7. But before we do, I have a couple public service announcements. First, remember, plenty can still happen from Monday when this video is recorded to Sunday's kickoffs, so make sure you are signed up in that RotoBaller Discord channel where we have experts there answering all your start and sit questions all week long. Second, we are at that point in the football season where bye weeks matter. We are talking about the bye week apocalypse here in week number 7 with 6 teams on a bye. Those teams include the Carolina Panthers, the Cincinnati Bengals, the Dallas Cowboys, the Houston Texans, the New York Football Jets, and the Tennessee Titans. So if you have any of these guys, and there's a lot of them here, then you need to find replacements. Adam Thielen, Jamar Chase, T. Higgins, Nico Collins, Garrett Wilson, CeeDee Lamb, DeAndre Hopkins. Yes, they all need to be replaced this week. Now, amongst the receivers that you're also looking at replacing could potentially be Deebo Samuel and Alec Pierce, who both are dealing with shoulder injuries of their own and could miss week number 7. And if they do play, they are likely to be limited. Now, the good news is there are a couple solid flex options on their way back from the emergency room here. And we're talking about Zay Jones of the Jacksonville Jaguars and Deontay Johnson from the Pittsburgh Steelers, who look to make their return from injury this week. Now, just because I can, let's talk about Tyreek Hill real quick. He is just 186 yards shy of 1,000 on the season, and we're just heading into week number 7. At the beginning of the season, maybe we should have took him a little bit more serious when he said he was going to go off for 2,000 yards, and while he's on pace for roughly 2,300, this week against the Eagles, he may get all 186 yards and then some. You're also going to be starting Stephon Diggs, Cooper Kupp, and yes, you can trust Puka Nacua this week, as well as Amon-Ra St. Brown and Keenan Allen. So what other wide receivers can you trust this week? Which receivers should you be fading? Don't worry, I got you covered. Just tune on in here. Starting with Marquise Hollywood Brown of the Arizona Cardinals taking on the Seattle Seahawks. Against the Rams, Brown was one of the most targeted receivers from week number 6, seeing 11 balls thrown in his direction. Unfortunately, he would only haul in 4 of those passes for 34 yards. Of the 68 snaps, Brown ran a route on 41 of them and earned 3 red zone targets. And that is huge because now he is getting looked at in the red zone, and that is where fantasy points are made. So what we have here is basically just a failure to communicate. If Dobbs and Brown can get on the same page with a little bit more consistency, then we are looking at a top 12 fantasy week in the cards, get it, for Marquise Brown this week. Now, Dobbs, he has made Brown his first read option more often than not, and I don't think nobody's talking about this nearly enough. This week, you better believe that there is going to be a focal point of fantasy conversation circling around Brown as the Cardinals face a Seahawks team that is allowing 47 fantasy points per game. You know what? Heck, fire up Michael Wilson while you're at it. Seattle has allowed 90 receptions, 1,024 yards, and 7 touchdowns to the wide receiver position this year, which are all among the top 7 highest totals surrendered in each of those categories in the league. Another wide receiver you're going to fire up this week is Brandon Aiyuk versus the Minnesota Vikings. Find a receiver playing against the Minnesota Vikings and fire them into your lineup each and every week. It's as simple as that. It also helps that San Francisco is going to be without Deebo Samuel and Christian McCaffrey, leaving Aiyuk as the focal point of this 49ers offense. An offense that faces a defense that is allowing the 3rd most fantasy points to wide receivers this season. A defense that is allowing 43.21 fantasy points per game and has surrendered 1,164 yards and 6 touchdowns to receivers thus far. Now, Aiyuk, he saw 10 targets against the Browns and turned that into 4 grabs for 76 yards against the Browns defense that is one of the best, if not the best, when it comes to limiting wideouts productivity. The loss of Samuel and McCaffrey there, Aiyuk saw a 41.7% target share. Through 6 weeks, only Tyreek Hill, Cooper Kupp, Nico Collins, and Brandon Aiyuk are averaging 3 yards per route run and have a wide receiver grade over 80 according to PFF. Now, finally, the other wide receiver I'm starting, and this one's kind of weird for me, it's Drake London versus the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. You ever have something that you just kind of said or accidentally typed out there that you immediately regretted? Well, this could possibly be it for me. But I simply cannot ignore what I am looking at here. 23% target share in 4 of the last 5 weeks. I can't ignore the 9 catches for 125 yards against the Commanders or his 6-catch performance for 78 yards in week number 5 against a tough Texans secondary. I also can't ignore the fact that Tampa Bay Buccaneers are allowing 38.68 fantasy points per game to the position this season and have allowed 5 touchdowns and 944 receiving yards to the position in the last 5 contests. Now I know it is hard to trust Desmond Ridder, but he's played okay-ish here the last couple weeks, and that's like a 200% improvement, and we're seeing what Drake London can do with just a little bit of an improvement. Now my sleeper of the week, it is Rashee Rice, who's coming off a 4-catch, 5-target performance and a touchdown there in week number 5. 4 catches on 4 targets there and 74 yards last week. And then this week, he gets to face a Chargers secondary that is allowing over 47 points themselves per game and more than 1,000 yards to the position. So how about some wide receivers that I'm sitting this week? It starts with George Pickens of the Steelers against that Rams defense. Last time that we saw Pickens, it was all unicorns and rainbows out there. He was scoring a touchdown on a 41-yard pass, leading the Steelers to a victory over the AFC rival there, the Baltimore Ravens. In fact, Pickens saw 10 targets, hauling in 6 of them for 130 yards. But that was 2 weeks ago. This week he faces a Rams defense that has allowed just 790 yards to receivers this season and a single receiving touchdown to date. Add that all up and you get a team defense that is allowing just 26.73 fantasy points per game. You also get to see a young Kenny Pickett having to face a very, very large and angry man in Aaron Donald. Now the good news for Pickett, but bad news for Pickens could be the return of Deontay Johnson, who will have plenty of quick, short passes in his return. Another wide receiver sit this week, it's Mike Evans against the Atlanta Falcons. This one hurts because you know I love myself some Mike Evans. The dude has been nothing but a Hall of Famer since entering the league. But Evans himself, he has been dealing with a hamstring injury of his own. And at times last week, Evans, he was invisible. Although somehow he saw 10 targets, he hauled in just 4 of them for 49 yards. Well, Evans is getting another week of what I'm sure is going to be limited practices to kind of help with that healing process. When he does step back on the field this Sunday, it's going to be lining up across from A.J. Terrell here in week number 7. And if we are lucky, maybe Evans gets lucky and hauls in a touchdown grab and kind of saves his fantasy day. But Atlanta, they are allowing just 62 receptions, 728 yards through the first 6 weeks of the season. They also rank 5th, top 5, whatever you want to call it here, on a per game basis, allowing just 27.55 fantasy points per game. And somehow you have to divvy that up between Chris Godwin and an ailing Mike Evans. I don't like these numbers favoring Evans very much. Now, another wide receiver, I don't like the numbers and how they kind of shade one way or the other, is Calvin Ridley as he takes on the New Orleans Saints. Now, I took a lot of heat, and I mean a lot, when I talked about Christian Kirk being the number 1 wide receiver in Jacksonville at the beginning of the season. Now, I'm not going to go out there and do a victory lap per se, but considering everyone was up in my business in week number 1, I think it's only appropriate that I point out that since week 1, Christian Kirk is averaging 16.4 fantasy points per game to Calvin Ridley's 10.2. So there. In the last 5 games, Kirk has a 25.8% target share to Ridley's 18.5%. And the return of Zay Jones doesn't do Ridley any favors. And neither is the fact that Trevor Lawrence's knee concerns, or the fact that Trevor Lawrence may or may not even play this week, or the fact that the Saints defense sits 13th against opposing wide receivers, allowing just 31.88 fantasy points per game. Yeah, I don't like this how it's shaping up for Calvin Ridley at all. Not one bit. Once again, here are your must-start, must-sit players at the wide receiver position for week number 7. Marquise Hollywood Brown is a must-start against Seattle. Seattle is giving it up on defense there, and Hollywood Brown has been seeing plenty of targets as of late. Brandon Aiyuk, they're out of options there at San Francisco as Deebo Samuel and Christian McCaffrey both could be out. That could be another 40% target share for Brandon Aiyuk in week number 7. You're also going to make sure you fire up Drake London versus Tampa Bay. Tampa Bay, they've struggled also against wide receivers, and with the little bit of improvement that we've seen from Desmond Ridder, that's a big-time improvement for Drake London. You are sitting George Pickens versus this Los Angeles Rams team, who's only giving up 26.73 fantasy points per game. The addition of Deontay Johnson means less targets for George Pickens. You're also sitting Mike Evans this week, who's dealing with a hamstring injury and faces one of the top 5 defenses in the Atlanta Falcons. You're also going to sit Calvin Ridley, who's no longer number 1. He's more of a number 2. And we got a tough matchup against the Saints with no Trevor Lawrence possible. But what is possible is hitting that like button, hitting that subscribe button, and make sure you're following RotoBaller for all your fantasy football analysis.